"Don't move," she whispered, just a fraction of a second before the glass slipped from her fingers. The wine fell in a slow arc, deep crimson against the dim amber lights of the restaurant, and landed across Jonathan Reed's tailored suit like a stain that didn't belong in a place like this. Conversation stopped. Forks hovered midair. Somewhere in the background, a piano note lingered too long, then faded into silence. Emily Carter didn't flinch. Not when the glass hit the table with a soft, hollow sound. Not when the liquid spread across fabric that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She stood there, still as the moment itself, her hand hovering where the glass had been, her eyes steady, watching not the stain, but the man. Jonathan Reed slowly looked down at his jacket, then back up at her. His jaw tightened. A muscle moved once, sharp and controlled. The kind of reaction that had made boardrooms freeze and competitors fold without a word. He stood up. Not fast. Not loud. But enough. Enough to shift the air in the room. The manager was already moving, panic written across his face, weaving between tables with hurried apologies forming before he even arrived. Other waitstaff exchanged glances, silent, knowing. This was the kind of mistake that ended shifts. Sometimes careers. Emily reached for a linen cloth. Calm. Measured. As if she had all the time in the world. She stepped closer, just enough to begin blotting the edge of the stain, her movements precise, almost practiced. Not rushed. Never rushed. Jonathan didn't stop her. He didn't step back either. He just watched. Studied. Like he was trying to understand something that didn't fit. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he asked, his voice low, controlled, carrying farther than it should have. A few guests looked away. Others leaned in, pretending not to. Emily didn't answer right away. The cloth pressed lightly against the fabric, absorbing what it could. Pointless, really. But she kept going. Then she looked up. Not with fear. Not with apology. Just clarity. "Yes," she said softly. One word. Nothing more. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't submission either. It just was. Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly. This wasn't how this went. People apologized. They explained. They rushed to fix what couldn't be fixed. They filled the silence with noise, hoping it would soften the consequence. But she didn't. She just stood there, holding the moment steady. The manager finally reached them, breath tight, voice already spilling over itself. "Mr. Reed, I am so sorry. This is completely unacceptable. We'll take care of everything, of course, your suit, your meal." Jonathan raised a hand. Just slightly. The manager stopped mid-sentence. Silence returned. Thicker now. Jonathan shifted his gaze back to Emily. There was something else there now. Not anger. Not exactly. Curiosity, maybe. Or recognition. Like hearing a note you hadn't heard in years, but somehow still knew. Emily leaned in just enough, her voice dropping to something only he could hear. One sentence. Quiet. Precise. And in that instant, something changed. Jonathan Reed didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stood there, frozen, as if the world around him had tilted slightly off its axis. And for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't the one in control. The sentence stayed with him long after she stepped back, as if it had weighed, as if it had found a place inside his mind that had been sealed for years and quietly unlocked it without force. Jonathan Reed did not react the way anyone expected. He did not call for compensation. He did not demand her dismissal. He did not even look at the manager again. Instead, he slowly reached for the edge of the table and sat back down, his movements controlled but different now, like something invisible had shifted just beneath the surface. The restaurant did not know how to breathe again. The manager stood frozen, still mid-apology, unsure whether to continue or disappear. Emily placed the damp cloth neatly beside the plate, her hands steady, her posture unchanged. She did not rush away. She did not linger either. She simply existed in that narrow space between consequence and choice, waiting. Jonathan looked at her again, but this time it was not the glance of a man evaluating a mistake. It was something quieter, more precise. "What is your name?" he asked. The question landed softly, but it carried. It was not asked out of politeness. It was asked because he needed the answer. "Emily," she said. Just that. No last name. No explanation. Jonathan nodded once, as if confirming something only he understood. Around them, the room began to move again, slowly, cautiously, like a pause scene resuming without full confidence. Glasses touched tables. Conversations returned in whispers before building into something resembling normal. But the space between them remained separate, untouched by the noise. Emily, he repeated, quieter this time, testing the sound of it. There was a flicker in his expression. Recognition, but not complete. Like a memory trying to surface through fog. He reached for his water glass, paused, then set it down again without drinking. Small movements. Delayed. Uncharacteristic. Emily noticed. Not the hesitation itself, but the reason behind it. She had seen that look before. Not in places like this. Not under chandeliers and polished marble. But in quieter rooms. Rooms where decisions were made that did not appear in headlines. Rooms where one sentence could cost someone everything or save them without ever being traced. The manager finally found his voice again, softer now, cautious. Sir, we can arrange for a replacement suit immediately. There is a boutique just 2 blocks away. We will handle the cost entirely, of course. Jonathan did not look at him. No, he said. One word. Final. The manager nodded quickly, relieved and confused at the same time, and stepped back, retreating into the background where he felt safer. Jonathan leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes still on Emily. How long have you been working here? He asked. Long enough, she replied. The answer was simple, but it closed more doors than it opened. He almost smiled. Almost. There it was again. That precision. Not evasive. Not defensive. Just exact. And before that, he asked. Emily tilted her head just slightly, as if considering whether the question deserved an answer. Then she reached for the empty wine glass, lifting it from the table with care. Would you like another glass, sir? She asked, her tone returning to professional, neutral, perfectly balanced. Jonathan watched her for a moment. He understood what she had done. She had not refused. She had redirected. Cleanly. Without friction. It was the kind of move he expected from senior executives in high-level negotiations, not from someone standing in a black apron holding a wine glass. Yes, he said finally. But this time, I will pour it myself. Emily nodded once. No surprise. No reaction. She turned and walked toward the bar, her steps measured, unhurried, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But Jonathan did not look away this time. He followed her with his eyes, studying the way she moved, the way she carried silence like it belonged to her, the way she had said that sentence. Not emotional, not dramatic, just true. He exhaled slowly, almost unnoticed. The kind of breath that came after realization, not before. Around him, the restaurant had fully returned to life. Laughter, glasses clinking, low conversations about markets, deals, vacations. But none of it reached him the same way anymore. Because now there was a question sitting in front of him, quiet but immovable. Not about the stain, not about the mistake, but about her, and more dangerously about what she knew. Jonathan did not touch the wine when it arrived. He watched her set the bottle down instead, watched the way she placed it slightly to the right of his glass, aligned with the edge of the table, as if precision mattered even in the smallest things. Emily stepped back, giving him space, but not distance. There was a difference. He noticed that now. Everything about her seemed intentional, not rehearsed, not performative, just exact. He reached for the bottle slowly, his fingers brushing the glass as he lifted it, then paused before pouring. You said something, he began, his voice quieter than before, stripped of its earlier edge, something you should not have known. Emily did not answer immediately. She stood with her hands lightly clasped in front of her, her posture relaxed, her expression neutral. Not defensive, not proud, just still. I said what was necessary, she replied. Jonathan poured a small amount of wine into the glass, the liquid catching the light as it settled. He did not drink. Necessary for who? He asked. Emily's eyes met his, steady, unwavering. That depends on what you choose to remember, she said. The words were simple, but they landed with weight. Jonathan leaned back slightly, studying her again, but now with a different lens. Not as someone out of place, but as someone deliberately placed. His mind moved quickly, scanning, connecting, searching through years of decisions, meetings, voices, moments that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now felt incomplete. There was something about the cadence of her voice, the way she chose her words. Not emotional, not reactive, structured, like someone trained to speak only when it mattered. He picked up the glass, turned it slightly, watching the surface ripple. We have Met before, he said. It was not a question. Emily tilted her head just a fraction, as if acknowledging the possibility without confirming it. Have we? She replied. Jonathan almost smiled again, but this time it faded before it could fully form. She was doing it again, giving him just enough to continue, never enough to conclude. You mentioned a number, he continued, his tone tightening slightly, not with anger, but with focus. A number that was never made public. The air between them shifted again, quieter now, heavier in a different way. Emily glanced briefly at the table, then back at him. Some things are not meant to be public, she said softly. Jonathan set the glass down, untouched. And yet you know them. And yet I do, she answered. No hesitation. No apology. Just fact. Jonathan's fingers tapped once against the table. A small movement. Controlled. But it carried the weight of a man recalibrating. That deal, he said slowly, choosing each word with care, was handled by a closed team. Legal, financial, internal. No external consultants. No leaks. No press. No records outside a secured system. Emily listened without interrupting. Her expression did not change, but there was a subtle shift in her eyes. Not tension. Recognition. And still, Jonathan added, his gaze locking onto hers. You repeated a line from that meeting. Word for word. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Not empty. Just present. Emily took a small step forward, just enough to close the distance slightly, her voice lowering so that it would not travel beyond their table. You said, she began, her tone calm, measured. If we sign this, we control the narrative, not the outcome. Jonathan's breath paused, just for a moment. A memory, sharp and precise, surfaced without warning. A private room. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 3 people at the table. One decision that would shift everything that came after. He had said those exact words. He remembered now. Not because they were important at the time, but because of what followed. He looked at her differently now. Not as someone who had overheard something. Not as someone guessing. But as someone who had been there. Or somewhere close enough to hear what should never have been heard. Who are you? He asked again. But this time the question carried something deeper than curiosity. Emily did not answer right away. Instead, she reached for the bottle, gently adjusting its position on the table as if correcting something only she could see. Then she straightened, meeting his gaze once more. Someone who listened, she said quietly. Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in concentration. That is not enough. Emily gave the smallest hint of a smile. Not warm. Not cold. Just knowing. It was enough that night, she replied. The words settled between them like a final piece in a puzzle he had not realized he was solving. Jonathan leaned back again, slower this time, his expression no longer guarded, no longer controlled in the way it had been before. Something else had taken its place. Not uncertainty. Not fear. Just awareness. Because whatever this was, whatever she was, it was not random. And for the first time in a long time, Jonathan Reed understood something he rarely allowed himself to admit. He was no longer the one asking the right questions. Jonathan did not speak for several seconds after her last words. The silence was no longer accidental. It was deliberate. Chosen. Around them, the restaurant continued its rhythm. But at their table, time seemed to move differently. Slower. Heavier. As if every second carried more meaning than it should. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table, his eyes never leaving hers. That night, he repeated, quieter now, as if testing the weight of it. You were there. It was not a question. Emily did not confirm it. She did not deny it either. She simply held his gaze, steady, composed, letting him arrive at his own conclusion. Jonathan's mind moved through the memory again, sharper this time. The room. The decision. The silence before the signatures. But now there was something new layered over it. Something he had not noticed then. A presence. Not at the table. Not part of the discussion. But close. Close enough to hear. Close enough to understand. You were not part of the deal, he said slowly. But you heard everything. Emily's expression softened just slightly, not with emotion, but with acknowledgement. People say more when they think no one is listening, she replied. Jonathan exhaled quietly. It was not frustration. It was realization. He leaned back again, his fingers brushing against the edge of the table, grounding himself in the present moment. That was a private negotiation, he continued. Confidential. Restricted access. The kind of meeting where every detail is controlled. Emily nodded once. And yet, she said, you chose the words you did. Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in resistance, but in focus. What is that supposed to mean? He asked. Emily took a small breath, her voice remaining calm, almost gentle. You did not say you would protect the outcome, she said. You said you would control the narrative. The sentence hung between them, familiar now, but different when spoken aloud like this, outside the context it had been created in. Jonathan felt something shift again, deeper this time. Not in the room. In himself. He remembered why he had said it. The pressure. The expectations. The need to appear certain, even when the variables were not fully in his control. He had chosen words that sounded strong, decisive. Words that reassured the room. But she had heard something else. You think that matters? He asked, his tone quieter now, less defensive, more searching. Emily met his gaze without hesitation. I think it mattered more than you realized, she said. Jonathan looked down at the table for a brief moment, his reflection faint in the polished surface. For years, he had built his reputation on precision, on control, on never saying more than necessary. And yet, in that moment, in that room, he had revealed something without intending to. Not to the people at the table, but to someone who was not supposed to be part of the conversation at all. He looked back up at her. Why tell me now? He asked. Why say anything at all? Emily did not answer immediately. She glanced briefly toward the dining room, where waiters moved between tables, where laughter and conversation filled the air as if nothing had changed. Then she looked back at him. Because you asked the wrong question, she said. Jonathan frowned slightly, not in confusion, but in concentration. What question? He asked. Emily stepped just a little closer, her voice lowering again, not to hide, but to focus. You asked what I knew, she said. Not why it mattered. The words landed quietly, but they stayed. Jonathan leaned back in his chair once more, slower this time. His posture no longer rigid, no longer controlled in the way it had been when the evening began. There was something else now. Not weakness, not uncertainty, just awareness. He looked at her for a long moment, taking in the details he had ignored before. The way she stood, the way she spoke, the way she never filled silence unless it served a purpose. This was not accidental. None of it was. You are not just a waitress, he said finally. Emily gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. Tonight, I am, she replied. Jonathan almost laughed, but the sound never fully formed. Instead, he nodded once, slowly, as if accepting something he could not yet fully define. The wine glass remained untouched. The stain on his suit had begun to dry, dark against the fabric, but he no longer seemed to notice it. Because the real disruption had already happened, and it was not on the surface. It was in the realization that control was not always about what you said in the room. Sometimes, it was about who was listening when you thought no one was. Jonathan did not reach for his phone. That alone was unusual. Normally, by now, there would have been a message sent, a quiet instruction issued, someone already pulling records, cross-checking staff lists, identifying exactly who Emily Carter was, and how she had crossed into a moment she should never have touched. But he did not move. He stayed exactly where he was, his attention fixed not on action, but on understanding. Emily remained beside the table, neither dismissed nor invited to leave. The space between them had changed again, no longer defined by roles, but by something far less visible and far more precise. You said it mattered, Jonathan said after a moment, his voice steady, controlled, but no longer sharp. Explain that. Emily did not answer immediately. She glanced down at the table, at the untouched wine, at the faint outline of the stain that had started all of this, then back at him. That sentence, she said slowly, told everyone in that room something you did not intend to reveal. Jonathan's expression did not change, but his focus sharpened. And what was that? He asked. Emily's gaze did not waver. That you were not certain of the outcome, she replied. The words were quiet, but they landed with clarity. Jonathan leaned back slightly, absorbing it, not rejecting it, not accepting it either. Just examining. Uncertainty is part of any negotiation, he said. That does not mean it. Defines the decision. Emily nodded once. True, she said. But the way you framed it did not hide the uncertainty. It redirected it. Jonathan's fingers rested lightly against the table, still now. No tapping, no movement. Go on, he said. Emily took a small breath, not because she needed to, but because the next words required precision. You focused on controlling the narrative, she said, because you could not fully control what would happen after. Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in disagreement, but in recognition of the logic. That is strategy, he replied. Emily tilted her head just slightly. It is, she said, but it is also a signal. Jonathan said nothing. He waited. Emily continued, her voice steady, her tone unchanged. The people in that room heard confidence, she said. They heard leadership. They heard control. She paused, just for a fraction of a second. But anyone listening from the outside would hear something else. Jonathan's gaze sharpened again. What? He asked. Emily met his eyes directly. That the outcome was uncertain enough to require control after the fact, she said. Silence followed. Not heavy, not dramatic, just exact. Jonathan exhaled slowly, his posture relaxing in a way that would have been almost invisible to anyone not watching closely. And you heard that, he said, from outside the room. Emily did not respond with words. She simply held his gaze, letting the answer exist without being spoken. Jonathan looked down briefly, then back up, his mind moving through the implications, not defensively, not reactively, but analytically. He had built entire companies on understanding signals, on reading between lines, on catching what others missed. And now, for the first time in a long time, he was on the other side of that equation. So you listened, he said. And you understood. Emily gave a small nod. I listened, she said, and I paid attention to what was not being said. Jonathan almost smiled again, but this time there was no edge to it. Just recognition. Most people do not, he said. Most people hear what they expect to hear. Emily's expression remained calm. Most people are part of the conversation, she replied. They are not listening from the outside. The distinction settled between them, clear, undeniable. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, his attention fully engaged now. No distraction, no distance. And now, he asked, why bring it back now? Emily glanced briefly toward the entrance of the restaurant, where new guests were arriving, their voices blending into the steady rhythm of the evening, then back at him. Because you still believe you control the narrative, she said. Jonathan did not respond immediately. He studied her, not with suspicion, not with challenge, but with something quieter, something closer to respect. And I do not, he asked. Emily's answer came without hesitation. Not if someone else understands the outcome better than you do, she said. The words did not challenge him. They did not accuse. They simply existed, clear and precise, like everything else she had said. Jonathan sat back slowly, his gaze drifting for a moment across the room before returning to her. For years, control had meant anticipating every variable, managing every detail, shaping every perception. But now, sitting across from someone who had never been part of the system he controlled, he understood something else. Control was not just about what you said, or even what you planned. Sometimes, it was about who was listening, and what they chose to remember. Jonathan remained still, but not passive. There was a difference now in the way he held silence. Before, silence had been a tool he used to control others. Now, it was something he was using to understand himself. His eyes rested on Emily, not with pressure, not with authority, but with focus. The kind of focus that stripped away assumptions. You are suggesting, he said slowly, choosing each word with care, that someone outside the system can see more clearly than those inside it. Emily did not hesitate. I am saying that distance changes perspective, she replied. Jonathan leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting for a brief moment across the room. A table of investors laughed too loudly. A couple near the window clinked glasses. Everything looked the same, but it did not feel the same anymore. And what do you see? He asked, turning back to her. Emily paused, not because she was unsure, but because the answer required precision. I see a man who built control, she said, her voice calm, even, and then trusted it too much. Jonathan's expression did not harden. It did not soften either. It simply held. Control is not a flaw, he said. Emily nodded once. No, she agreed. But believing it is complete is. The words landed quietly, but they stayed. Jonathan looked at her for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. Not frustration, not resistance, just recognition of something that had been forming without him noticing. You think I missed something, he said. Emily met his gaze directly. I think you chose not to look for it, she replied. Jonathan's fingers moved slightly on the table, not tapping, not restless, just adjusting. A small shift. And what is that? He asked. Emily did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached for the edge of the table and straightened a folded napkin that had shifted out of alignment. A small action. Precise. Then she looked back at him. The outcome you could not control, she said. Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in challenge, but in concentration. Every outcome carries risk, he said. That is understood. Emily shook her head gently. Risk is expected, she said. But this was different. Jonathan leaned forward again, just slightly, his attention sharpening. How? He asked. Emily held his gaze. Because it was not external, she said. It was internal. The words settled between them, quiet but heavy. Jonathan did not react immediately. His mind moved through the structure of that deal, the people involved, the layers of approval, the safeguards. Everything had been accounted for. Everything had been controlled. Or so he had believed. Internal, he repeated, slower this time. Emily nodded. You were not protecting against what might happen, she said. You were trying to manage what had already begun. Jonathan's breath paused, just for a fraction of a second. Not visible, not obvious, but real. A shift, a connection forming where there had been none before. That is a strong claim, he said quietly. Emily did not look away. It is a precise one, she replied. Silence followed again. Not empty, not uncertain, just exact. Jonathan leaned back slowly, his gaze lowering briefly to the table before returning to her. The room around them continued as if nothing had changed. But something had. Not in the space. In the understanding. If what you are saying is true, he said, his voice steady, measured, then you are not just describing what happened. He paused, just long enough for the thought to complete itself. You are describing what I missed. Emily gave a small nod. Yes, she said. Jonathan studied her, not with skepticism, not with dismissal, but with a level of attention he rarely gave. Anyone. And you expect me to accept that? He said. Emily's expression remained calm. I do not expect anything, she replied. I am simply telling you what is already there. Jonathan almost smiled again, but it faded before it could fully form. Not because it was false, but because it was unnecessary. He looked down at the wine glass again, still untouched, then back at her. You are very certain, he said. Emily's answer came without hesitation. No, she said. Jonathan's brow shifted slightly. No, he repeated. Emily shook her head gently. I am very careful, she said. The distinction settled between them, clear and undeniable. Jonathan leaned back once more, his posture no longer rigid, no longer defined by control, but by awareness. Because in that moment, he understood something he had not considered before. It was not that she knew more. It was that she had been listening, when he thought there was nothing left to hear. Jonathan did not look away this time. Not when she finished speaking. Not when the silence settled again between them, sharper now, more defined. He stayed exactly where he was, his attention fixed, his mind no longer moving through assumptions, but through patterns. He had spent years recognizing patterns in markets, in people, in risk. But this was different. Because it was not about what was visible. It was about what had been ignored. Internal, he repeated again, softer now, as if the word itself needed to be examined from every angle. Emily did not interrupt. She did not reinforce. She let the word sit where it needed to. Jonathan's gaze drifted briefly past her, not to the room, but through it, as if he were looking at something layered behind the present moment. There were only 5 people in that room, he said slowly. 5. Emily nodded once. Yes. Each one vetted, he continued. Each one with a reason to protect the outcome. Emily's expression remained unchanged. On the surface, she said. Jonathan's eyes sharpened slightly. You think one of them compromised it. It was not a question. It was a narrowing of possibility. Emily tilted her head just slightly. I think the outcome was already shifting before the signatures were placed, she replied. Jonathan leaned forward, his elbows resting lightly on the table now, his posture no longer distant, no longer controlled in the way it had been. When the evening began, this was focus, direct, undivided. Shifting how, he asked. Emily glanced briefly at the wine glass, then back at him. You said you would control the narrative, she said. But someone else had already started writing it. The sentence landed quietly, but it carried weight. Jonathan's fingers stilled completely now. No movement. No adjustment. Just stillness. His mind moved through the timeline again, but this time not as a sequence of decisions, but as a sequence of signals. Small moments. Comments. Delays. Things that had not aligned perfectly, but had not seemed significant enough to question at the time. Until now. You are suggesting pre-alignment, he said, his voice lower now, more precise. Emily gave a small nod. Not formal, she said, but intentional. Jonathan's gaze did not leave hers. Between who, he asked. Emily did not answer immediately, not because she did not know, but because the answer was not the point. You already know where to look, she said instead. Jonathan exhaled slowly, the sound barely noticeable, but it marked something. A shift from questioning her to questioning himself. He leaned back again, his eyes lowering briefly as if recalibrating the entire structure of what he thought had happened. There was a delay, he said after a moment. 12 minutes. Emily said nothing. It was dismissed as a technical issue, he continued. A document revision. Minor. Emily remained still, listening. But it was not consistent with the process, he added, his tone tightening slightly, not with emotion, but with clarity. Emily met his gaze. No, she said quietly. Jonathan looked at her again, and this time there was no trace of skepticism left. Only recognition. Not of her identity, but of her accuracy. You were not in that room, he said. But you understand it. Emily gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. I listened, she said. Jonathan almost smiled, but this time it held for a fraction longer. Not amusement. Respect. And now you are telling me, he said, that the outcome I thought I managed was already moving without me. Emily did not soften the answer. Yes. The word was quiet. Final. Jonathan sat still for a long moment. The noise of the restaurant returned in layers, distant but present. Glasses, voices, movement, but none of it touched the space between them. Because now the question was no longer about what had happened. It was about what he had failed to see while it was happening. He reached for the wine glass, lifted it slightly, then paused again before drinking. A habit, a delay, a moment to think. Then he set it back down, untouched. You said someone was writing the narrative, he said. Before I even tried to control it. Emily nodded once. Yes. Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in doubt, but in focus. And you heard enough, from outside the room, to understand that. Emily met his gaze, steady, composed. I heard enough to know you were reacting to something you did not fully see, she said. Jonathan leaned back once more, slower this time, his posture no longer defined by authority, but by awareness. Because in that moment, something became clear in a way it had not been before. He had not been in control of the narrative. He had been responding to one that had already begun. And the only person who had seen it clearly had never been part of the room at all. Jonathan did not rush to fill the silence this time. He let it stretch, not as a tactic, but as a necessity. Because what sat in front of him now was not a negotiation, not a deal to be closed, not a situation to be controlled. It was a realization. And realization, unlike strategy, could not be accelerated. He leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting once more across the restaurant. But this time he was not observing people. He was reconstructing time. The 12-minute delay. The phrasing of certain responses. The way one of the participants had remained unusually quiet until the final moment. Small things. Insignificant at the time. Now precise. It was not random, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Emily did not respond. She did not confirm. She simply stood there, allowing him to arrive at the conclusion without interruption. Jonathan's eyes returned to her. You heard it, he said. Not just the words. The pattern. Emily nodded once. Patterns are easier to see from the outside, she replied. Jonathan's fingers moved slightly on the table, not restless, not tense, just recalibrating. Inside, you are too close, he said. Emily gave a small nod. Inside, you are part of it, she said. Outside, you can observe it. The distinction settled again, deeper this time. Jonathan leaned forward, his attention narrowing further, his voice lowering slightly, not out of secrecy, but out of focus. There was someone, he said slowly, who asked a question that did not belong. Emily's eyes did not shift. Yes, she said. Jonathan's gaze sharpened. You remember it. Emily held his gaze. I remember what mattered, she replied. Jonathan exhaled slowly, the sound almost imperceptible, but it marked something. Recognition, not of the person, but of the moment. He asked about timeline exposure. Jonathan continued, his tone steady, analytical. Before the terms were finalized. Emily gave a small nod. That was not a clarification, she said. That was positioning. Jonathan's jaw tightened slightly, not with anger, but with precision. Positioning for what, he asked. Emily did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached for the wine bottle again, adjusting it just slightly, aligning it once more with the edge of the table. A small action. Intentional. Then she looked back at him. For control, she said. Jonathan's eyes narrowed, not in doubt, but in focus. Control of what, he asked. Emily met his gaze directly. Not the deal, she said. The outcome after the deal. The words landed with clarity. Jonathan leaned back slowly, the movement deliberate, his mind now moving through a different sequence. Not what had been said, not what had been agreed upon, but what had been set in motion before any of it became official. He was not reacting, Jonathan said quietly. He was preparing. Emily nodded once. Yes. Jonathan's gaze dropped briefly to the table, then returned to her, sharper now, more defined. And I did not see it, he said. It was not a question. It was not an admission either. It was simply a fact, stated without resistance. Emily did not soften it. No, she said. Silence followed again, but this time it was different. Not a pause. Not a gap. A conclusion forming. Jonathan reached for the wine glass again, lifted it slightly, then stopped. The reflection of the overhead lights moved across the surface of the liquid, shifting with the angle of the glass. He watched it for a moment, then set it down once more, untouched. You saw it, he said. Emily's answer came without hesitation. I heard it, she replied. Jonathan almost smiled again, but this time there was no trace of disbelief, no trace of challenge. Just acknowledgement. And you understood it. He added. Emily gave a small nod. I understood what it meant, she said. Jonathan leaned back further now, his posture no longer structured by control, but by clarity. Because the pattern was no longer fragmented. It was complete. The delay, the question, the phrasing, the shift in tone. It had all been there. Not hidden, just unobserved. He shaped the narrative, Jonathan said slowly. Before I even realized there was one. Emily met his gaze, steady as ever. Yes. The words settled without resistance. Jonathan's eyes moved once more across the room. But this time, he was not searching for anything. He was recognizing something. Control had never been lost in a single moment. It had shifted gradually, quietly, while he was focused on the wrong variables. And the only person who had seen it clearly had been the one no one thought to notice. Jonathan did not speak for a long moment after that. Not because he had nothing to say, but because, for the first time in years, saying something too quickly would have been a mistake. He sat there, still, composed, but no longer in control of the moment the way he had been when the night began. The restaurant moved around him in quiet layers, voices rising and falling, glasses touching, footsteps passing, but none of it reached him the same way anymore. Because now there was clarity. Not loud, not dramatic, just undeniable. He looked at Emily again, really looked this time, not at her uniform, not at her role, but at the precision in everything she had done. The timing, the restraint, the way she had said only what was necessary and nothing more. You never needed to be in the room, he said quietly. Emily did not respond. She did not need to. The truth of it was already settled between them. Jonathan leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting for a brief second before returning to her. You saw it all, he continued, without being part of it. Emily gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I listened, she said. Jonathan almost smiled, but this time it stayed, faint, controlled, but real. Not amusement, not disbelief, respect. And I was too busy managing the room to notice what was happening around it, he said. Emily did not correct him. She did not soften it either. She simply let the statement stand as it was. Jonathan exhaled slowly, his posture relaxing in a way that would have been invisible to anyone who did not know him. The tension that usually defined his presence was no longer there. In its place was something quieter. Awareness. He reached for the wine glass again, lifted it, and this time, he did not hesitate. He took a small sip. Not because he wanted the wine, but because the moment had changed. The delay was no longer needed. He set the glass down carefully, his movements deliberate, controlled, but no longer rigid. You changed something tonight, he said. Emily tilted her head slightly. No, she replied. Jonathan's brow shifted, just a fraction. No, he repeated. Emily's expression remained calm, steady. I did not change anything, she said. I just said it out loud. The words settled quietly, but they carried weight. Jonathan nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. And that is enough, he said. Emily did not answer. She did not need to, because they both understood now. It was not the mistake, not the wine, not the disruption. It was the sentence. The one moment where everything had been reduced to something simple, something clear, something impossible to ignore. Jonathan looked at her for a long moment, then reached into his jacket, pulling out a card. He placed it on the table, sliding it slightly toward her, but not pushing it. Not insisting, just offering. If you ever decide that listening is not enough, he said quietly, call me. Emily glanced at the card, but she did not reach for it. Not immediately. She let it sit there, between them, as if it were just another object on the table, no more important than the glass or the folded napkin. And if I do not? She asked softly. Jonathan's expression did not change. Then you will continue to see what others miss, he said. And I will have to accept that I met someone who understood my decisions better than I did. Emily held his gaze for a moment longer, then finally reached for the card. Not quickly, not eagerly, just when it made sense. She picked it up, glanced at it briefly, then slipped it into the small pocket of her apron without a word. Jonathan nodded once. Not approval, not expectation, just acknowledgement. The moment was complete. Emily stepped back, just slightly, creating space. Again, restoring the boundary that had been blurred but not broken. Will there be anything else, sir? She asked, her tone returning to neutral, professional, balanced. Jonathan looked at her, and for the first time that evening, the question did not feel transactional. It felt final. He shook his head once. No, he said. Then, after a brief pause, he added, that was enough. Emily gave a small nod, then turned and walked away, her steps measured, unhurried, exactly as they had been when the night began. Jonathan watched her for a moment, then leaned back in his chair, his gaze lowering to the table, to the faint stain that had started it all. It was still there, visible, imperfect, but no longer important, because what remained was not the mistake. It was the realization, and that stayed long after everything else had been cleaned away. In the quiet that followed, Jonathan Reed understood something he had not considered in a very long time. Power was not about controlling every detail. It was about recognizing the moment when someone else had already seen the truth and choosing to listen.